Welcome to Story Connections, where we discuss books and all the wonderful, exciting, frightening, and fascinating tales they present, and how all these things pertain to our lives. Now, here are your hosts, Kathryn Townsend and Rebecca Guthrie.
Hi, welcome to Story Connections. I'm Rebecca Guthrie.
And I'm Kathryn Townsend.
And this is a show about the love of story. It is a show that is designed to talk about books and stories and occasionally movies or news articles and about why they matter, why they have an impact, why we care about them, why they are important, and all of the wonderful magical things that they can show us about life in other cultures and life and ourselves and life in general. So I hope you will enjoy joining us on this ride as we unpack as many books as there are in the world. This weekend, I don't know where I've been my entire life, but there's a website out there called Goodreads.com, which is fabulous. And if you aren't a member of Goodreads.com, you should definitely go be a member of Goodreads.com. But it is a website that you pick the books that you like, and it has an algorithm that suggests other books that you might like, and it's like the world of books reopened to me. I learned how to read when I was 7, and all of a sudden I know there's all of these new books. So I am Rebecca, and like Kathryn's like, she's Kathryn, and I have a degree in English literature, and Kathryn taught English for how many years?
Well, if you only count the years that I was in the classroom, 5. But if you count the years that I homeschooled, almost 26.
So she's been an English teacher for 26 years. So if we occasionally get a little stuffy, we don't mean to be.
English teachery.
There we go, English teachery.
So I guess we ought to watch your grammar then, eh?
Yeah.
Welcome, ladies.
Thank you very much. So because I'm an English lit major and everything that I do has to do with books and writing, I created a outline of what we were going to do in the show. But I want to really quickly define story the way that I think of the story. And the way that we define story is by dictionary.com, and it's a narrative, either true or fictitious, in prose or verse, designed to interest, amuse, or instruct the hearer or the reader.
Okay, so that's what she was talking about when she said a little English teacher.
Right. But it gives us a starting point. It gives us a definition of where we're trying to do, what we're trying to say, so that we're all on the same page, because it's much easier to have a conversation.
I know, I'm the one who taught you that he who defines the terms wins the debate.
It's true. Kathryn was a nationally ranked debate champion in college.
Go
ahead.
So when we talk about story, what we're really talking about are things that happen that we relate to ourselves.
Right.
So when your friend is telling you about something that happened to her at the store or with her kids or whatever, when you are listening to that story, you're thinking about how that impacted you, but you're also thinking about, hey, if I were in that situation, how would I feel? Or if I were in that situation, what would I do? Or how is what she's saying relating to something that I need to do or that I ought to do? Well, when we read books, we have that same opportunity to think about, how does this impact me? How does this relate to me? How does this change my life? How does this make me think about things differently? And what we want to do is just explore all of those ideas. And so, people crave stories. We are storytellers. From the time we're tiny children, we tell stories. And
sometimes fantastical stories. I mean,
yes.
You've all been with a 4-year-old who's telling you about the giant purple elephant with pink spots that they saw at the grocery store with Daddy. Well, probably they didn't see a giant elephant that was purple with pink spots, but they're creating stories for themselves to amuse themselves.
Right. And that's really an important part of being a human being.
Right.
I firmly believe that telling stories, listening to stories, reading stories, relating stories, sharing
watching stories,
all of those things make us more human. And so I'm really excited about doing this and exploring stories.
Yeah, so our theme, if you've been listening to KVOI, there's been our promo has been running, and Kathryn says, C.S. Lewis once said, we read to know we're not alone. And that really is the underlying theme of our show, is relating books, relating stories to ourselves. I was reading in prep for this a bunch of articles about how we take stories and how they we relate to stories, and we're not really going to be talking about TVs or movie shows too much because we're both book lovers, not so much TV watchers. Or
I think you could fairly say obsessive readers.
Yeah. I can read a 200-page book in about 2.5 hours, and Kathryn can read it even faster. So when we talk about all of the books we read, it's because we read really fast, and it's not uncommon to read a book a day.
And on vacation, sometimes 2 or 3 books.
Yeah,
a day.
a long car ride, that's, pack a...
So are you able to comprehend what the story is trying to communicate to you?
Absolutely.
Because of how quickly you read?
Absolutely.
Yes. Our reading comprehension is fairly decent. As, that's technical. But my brain just went dead. I forgot what I was going to say.
Okay, well, I think we should talk about themes.
Okay, we can talk about themes.
Okay, so as we go through this program and we talk about books and we have topics for the week, we're going to be talking about those topics in the context of the 7 major themes that you find in literature. And so even though this is a little English teachery, we're going to briefly cover what those 7 themes are. And the idea is that the plot structures that we're talking about, the 7 plot structures, is what you find in every book. No matter who wrote it, when they wrote it, you can reduce it to one of these 7 basic plots.
And there are arguments about how many plots there should be. You can find numerous books and sources on the internet that are like, no, there's actually 20 plots. No, there's actually 32 plots. No, there's actually 3 plots.
Or there's only 4.
Right, or there's only 4. I actually read a source that said all stories are about conflict. There's one plot, conflict. If there's no conflict, nobody cares. So when we say 7 basic plots, there may be English people out there who are like, well, that's not technically true. There could be many. It depends on how you define it. But how we're doing this is with 7 basic plots like you learned in middle school or should have learned in middle school.
Or maybe forgot.
I will be completely honest. I was like, I know there are 7 basic plots, and I was wandering around coming up with 6, going, I don't know what the 7th one is. I don't know what the 7th one is. I got a degree in this stuff.
Okay. So the first one is Man versus Nature.
So Man versus Nature, we tried to pick books that pretty much everybody had either read or they knew the plot line. So a good story from Man versus Nature is Moby Dick, which I will be completely honest, I think is a horrible book. I think it's
not a horrible book.
I think it's long. I think it wasn't even in print when Herman Melville died. It wasn't a success when he was alive. It wasn't until the early 20th century. But everybody knows the story of Captain Ahab and Moby Dick.
I know, but how can you hate a book that starts off with, call me Ishmael, and then explains he goes to sea because he's suicidal? I mean, really. How can you hate that?
Really?
Really? That's the only way that I would go to sea.
Okay, Kathryn is terrified of boats. Terrified of boats. And she has a perfectly legitimate story behind why she's terrified of boats, and we will tell that story later. But, yeah,
so
boats are not her friend. Anyways, but Moby Dick. So Moby Dick, for those of you who may not know, is a story about a man named Captain Ahab who goes to sea to take revenge on a great sperm whale called Moby Dick. And he's taking revenge because
and you need to know that Moby Dick is the great white whale. When you hear of the great white whale, that's Moby Dick.
Right. So Moby Dick attacked Captain Ahab's ship the last go around and took Captain Ahab's leg, and that makes Captain Ahab basically go insane. And so he lies to the owners of the ship because even though he's the captain, he doesn't actually own the ship, and says, oh yeah, we'll just go out whaling to get the whales so that we can have the oil, because during that period of time the way that they lit their lamps was through oil. Whale oil, thank you. And so he says, so sure, we're totally doing that. They get out to the middle of the sea, and Captain Ahab says, ha ha ha, no we're not. We're going to go find this great white whale, and we're going to kill him. And the rest of the story is about Captain Ahab's insanity. And at the end
I think the word you're looking for is monomaniacal.
There you go. Technical English term.
No, it's not.
It's multisyllabic. It totally is.
Okay.
Anyways, at the end of the book, I'm going to spoil the end of the book. Captain Ahab dies trying to kill this whale. He harpoons it, and the whale is so big that he takes Captain Ahab and the entire ship down. And you never find out if Moby Dick actually dies. He just kills everybody.
Well, not Ishmael.
No, not Ishmael. And Ishmael is left floating to a coffin-turned life raft thing, because they have this coffin that they built for somebody who was supposed to die but didn't, and it ends up being sort of like his coffin, and then he gets rescued and he writes this book about his insane adventure. And you now have saved yourself like 700 pages of reading, and it's incredibly boring, and I had to read it for an English class, and I hated every minute of it. I actually cheated. I listened to it on audiobook and sewed while I created several projects while I was...
I'm sorry, but multitasking while you're reading is not cheating. It's being efficient.
Okay. Well, fine. I multitasked while I read. And I actually think that listening to audiobooks and actually reading, they're very different, but you get the story, and the purpose of reading is to enjoy the story. You know, people who talk about, well, you have to use your brain in every way. No. No, the reason that you read is to enjoy stories. And my feeling about it is life is too short to read stories that you don't like, so I will totally admit when I have started several books and gotten, 10, 20, 30 pages into this and been like, yeah, no. I also am one of those people that read mystery novels backwards. I figure out who the main characters are, I flip to the back of the book, figure out who dies, who's the murderer, and then read the book, because I don't like suspense or scary things.
Yeah, so mystery's probably not your favorite genre.
No, I do like some mysteries. I like cozy mysteries, but I don't like scary. And I hate true crime, and horror is not something we will probably ever talk about on the show because I can't read it. It gives me nightmares.
Okay, there are people who would say that Monster Hunters International is horror.
Monster Hunters International is not horror. And we will talk about Monster Hunters International, but we have 15 seconds before we are going to go to commercial, so we're not going to get into this. But anyways, we are Rebecca Guthrie and Kathryn Townsend, and this is Story Connections, and if you want to catch us on Facebook, it's facebook.com/story, or Why Stories Matter. So, thank you.
Promoting free enterprise and independent thinking. This is Tucson's intelligent talk station, 1030 KVOI, The Voice. Intelligent weekend talk that's live and local. Only on AM 1030 KVOI, The Voice. Call in now, 790-2040. That's 790-2040.
Hi. So we're back, and we're talking about the plot Man versus Nature. And we just finished a really quick overview of Moby Dick as an example of man versus nature. Some other books that are examples of man versus nature would be like The Call of the Wild. Basically, all of Jack London's books are man versus nature. And Tarzan, Robinson Crusoe, those are all examples as well. So the next theme, or plot, I keep saying theme, but what I mean is plot. The next plot that we're going to talk about is man versus man.
And then for this one, we picked Harry Potter. Because man versus man is really heroes versus villains. And there are 7 Harry Potter books, and there are lots and lots and lots of subplots of man versus man in the broad Harry Potter versus Voldemort, or he who must not be named, plot structure. If you have not read the books or haven't seen the movie, and I'm sorry, I have seen 2 of the movies, the books do such a better job. So read the books. Don't watch the movies. Anyways, the overarching theme, man versus man plot, is between Harry Potter and Voldemort, and they are arch rivals. Harry Potter is a good young wizard, and Lord Voldemort is an evil old wizard, and it's the epic saga that is their life. And there's wizards, and the people who aren't magical, unfortunately, like me, are called muggles. It's just, okay, I'm sorry. There is a part of me that really wishes that if I ran into the barrier, which actually exists in King's Cross, that I would get to platforms 9 3/4. And this is why we read. We read so that we can want to have those kinds of adventures.
I have absolutely no desire to actually, for that world to be real, no thank you.
Really?
Really.
I think it'd be a lot of fun.
I think it's fun as fantasy.
Okay, well, I think that my house exists like a Harry Potter house, because in Harry Potter, they have this bus called the Night Bus, and it is a crazy bus that just drives wherever, and houses and streets, signs and lamp posts jump to get out of the way. Well, I'm pretty sure that in my house, my walls move and they jump out to grab me and make sure that I run into them. So I'm pretty sure it exists even if we don't want it to. So I'd like to actually be a wizard as opposed to a muggle.
Or, you could just be a klutz.
That's possible too.
Okay. In any case, so Man vs. Man is essentially a story of, not just villains versus heroes. That is Man vs. Man. But it also sometimes is, the idea of two people with conflicting goals.
Yes.
And they don't necessarily have to be villain and hero. That's just the easiest.
Yeah. That is the easiest way to look at it. But a lot of stories, I can think of lots of stories off of the top of my head that are man versus man. And I can think of a lot of TV shows, a lot of movies that are man versus man. I'm sure that people who are listening can think off the top of this is probably the easiest plot to pick just because there's so many.
Anytime two people come into conflict, right, we've got man versus
man.
And,
we're talking about the seven broad plot structures, but within each plot structure, you could have lots of subplot structures. So, within Moby Dick, there's lots of man versus man conflict because Captain Ahab is insane and his crewmates are not, and there's that kind of conflict.
Well, at least his first mate is not insane.
Starbucks, which has nothing to do with the coffee shop.
Yes. Although when I first heard of Starbucks, I thought, why would you name a coffee shop after a character in Moby Dick?
But that's not what happened. So the next one that we're going to talk about, and we're actually going to talk about two, they're similar, but they're different, is Man vs. Society. And Man vs. Society is, the two books that we're going to be talking about are Fahrenheit 451 and 1984. And they're both dystopia novels. And dystopia right now is having a really big comeback, for lack of a better word.
I don't know if I would say comeback. I think I would say it's just really trendy right now.
Okay, it's very trendy. But there are lots. Divergent is a movie that's just coming out. Everybody knows
Hunger Games. So dystopia novels dystopic novels are those where society is warped, that there's something wrong with society. And usually there's a hero who's trying to right whatever's wrong.
I think the word hero, I don't think hero is the right word. I think protagonist is the right word because a hero...
Okay, I'll agree with that.
The protagonist is the main character, and, in 1984 or in Fahrenheit 451, they're not heroes.
You're right, they're not.
Katniss in Hunger Games is a hero because what she does... If you don't know the story of Hunger Games is a story about this society that has 13 districts, and 12 of each district they have to take a tribute, one boy and one girl, and they get put into a lottery and they get picked. Well, Katniss's younger sister, Primrose, gets picked in the lottery, her first go-around, and Katniss volunteers to save Prim's life, and that is heroic. So she is a hero.
Right.
But the protagonists in Fahrenheit 451 and 1984 really aren't. So Fahrenheit 451 I read my freshman year in high school, and it had such a big impact on me that I can still remember how I felt reading the book. It's that's part of why I picked it, was because it had such a moving impact on me. The premise of Fahrenheit 451 is that Fahrenheit 451 is the temperature at which books burn.
Well, paper burns.
And that's why that the book was titled Fahrenheit 451. But in this society, firefighters, instead of putting out fires, start fires, and they burn books.
And they don't just burn books. They burn down the houses of people who have books.
Right. So the protagonist is a firefighter, and he's burning down houses, and they find out about this house of a woman who is a book collector who's kept it secret because they have a dog that sniffs out books. They have a mechanical dog that sniffs out books, and they being the firefighters. And the overarching society, the leaders of the society have created this, because people don't need books anymore, and they say this because we have sports and we have TV, and there's nothing that books teach us.
Well, books just confuse people because they try to make them think about things.
Right. So they go to this woman's house, and instead of letting them burn the house down, as they're bringing the books out into the center of her yard, to light them on fire and then light the books on fire, she sets herself on fire and runs into the house and commits suicide and dies in her house with books. And this is a huge life-changing thing for our protagonist. And it's the story about how he discovers the importance of books and the wonder of books and why they matter. And
risks his life for them. And actually not just his life, his wife's life as well.
Right.
Although his wife is not a particularly sympathetic character, so we don't really care that her life is risked.
No, but he still does do that. So if you haven't read Fahrenheit 451, it's not a very long book. It's by Ray Bradbury, and I highly recommend that you pick it up.
So another example of a dystopic novel would be 1984. And 1984 is, just like Rebecca had sort of a traumatic, life-changing experience.
Because if people were trying to burn down my books, I would go nuts. You can ask my husband. I don't have enough bookshelf space for all of my books.
And that's why God invented Kindle. So anyway, I had a similar experience with 1984. I, dating myself, was in high school in 1984, and I was invited to participate in a forum that was on television about what do you think about 1984 and is it happening and all of those kinds of things. And I hadn't read 1984. So, before I could get on TV and talk about it, I needed to read the book. And it is one of the most depressing things that I've ever read in my life. Before that or since then, it's just depressing. And it's actually a reason why I got involved in politics at one point, because I just thought, we can't live like that, and we could live like that. And so in this book, there is a man who works for the party that runs everything, and he's in the outer party, and there's an inner party, and he starts to feel like, I don't like this, and I wish it were different, and I want to make it different, and he starts writing down his ideas, which are treasonous, and he gets caught, and the woman that he loves gets caught, and they essentially are brainwashed and tortured. And he gives up everything that makes him who he is as a result of the oppression of the state. And for me, it started making me think as a high school student about, what do I stand for? What do I believe in? What would I be willing to give up? What are my worst fears? And so it was a very formative book for me. So just like Rebecca would say, you should read Fahrenheit 451, I would say you need to read 1984, because you need to think about, who am I in the context of the society that I live in? And who am I in the context of the government that I live under?
Right. The other thing is that right now, with all of the stuff that's coming out about the NSA and all of this stuff, people keep talking about Big Brother. And Big Brother is the party in 1984 that watches everything. There's a television that lives in everybody's house that basically is like a permanent Skype. You can always see what's happening in people's houses, and they have to learn where they can stand so that they aren't being watched 24/7 by Big Brother.
Right.
The whole war is peace thing is a quote that comes out of...
And doublethink.
Right.
Thought crime.
Right.
All of those, Newspeak, all of those are from 1984.
So when you hear those, read the book. And it really is, if you're looking for a happy-go-lucky book, this is not it, but it's something that...
The concepts in it are really, really important.
Right.
Especially today.
Right. It's very
prophetic.
Thank you, prophetic. The joys of live radio. So we've gotten through 3 of the 4. So the next one that we're going to 3 of the 7. Yes. So the next one that we're going to talk about really quickly is
after the break.
After the break, is going to be man versus machine / technology. And I bet you that you can think of a lot of movies. It's harder to think of books, but there's a lot of movies that are man versus machine or technology right now.
That's true. So we'll see you soon.
Miss a show? Hear the podcast through our website, kvoi.com. Intelligent weekend talk that's live and local. Only on AM 1030, KVOI, The Voice. Call in now, 790-2040. That's 790-2040.
Hi, welcome back to Story Connections. So we talked before the break, we covered, of the 7 basic plots, we covered man versus nature, man versus man, man versus society, and now we're talking about man versus machines technology. And probably the godfather or grandfather, if you want to say, of this is Isaac Asimov, which I'm sure there are people who are going to be like, no, it wasn't this, it was so-and-so. But for all intents and purposes, with robotics and with robots and machines being something that comes into conflict, he really changed the tone. So the book that we're going to talk about is a book called I, Robot, which got turned into a movie, which you can totally ignore with Will Smith in it because it doesn't have anything to do with the book. They just have the same name. And it's a whole bunch of short stories.
It's 9 short stories,
right,
that are connected together, so it feels like it's a book, or a novel, even though it's really short stories.
Right. So you may have heard of what are called the 3 laws of robotics, which are often shortened to the 3 laws or 3 laws. And the first law is a robot may not injure a human being or through an inaction allow a human being to come to harm. 2, a robot must obey the orders given to it by a human being, except when such orders would conflict with the first law. 3, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protections do not conflict with the first or second law. And the short stories are all about how those rules work and how robots relate to human beings. So the first short story is a short story about a little girl who has a robot nanny
that she loves,
that she believes is like her mother. Because her mother is a society woman and
kind of ignores her.
Right. So there's this sort of backlash of having robots be child caregivers because they're robots. And this woman decides that she's going to take the robot away from her daughter who loves her as a mother. And it's the story of the first story is one of that.
The her being the robot, not the her being the mother.
Thank you. So there's 8 other short stories. They all have to do with the conflict of how men deal with technology and machines.
Although I will point out that in that particular short story, the conflict isn't really man versus robot. The conflict is really man versus man, because the conflict is between the mother and the child. I think a better example of man versus technology is the Little Lost Robot.
I agree. The Little Lost Robot, that was actually the next one that I was going to. So the Little Lost Robot is about a robot who they've changed how the 3 rules work. And this robot goes insane, basically. And so they have the first law of robotics modified to no robot may injure a human being. And they take out the part that says, or through an action allow a human being to come to harm. And so the robot goes and hides because the robot doesn't want to do what the robot's supposed to do anymore. And it's about the robot, about the human. I forget what the term is, but there's a psychologist basically for robots who's trying to find this robot. And
it's a robopsychologist.
A robopsychologist. There we go. It's a robopsychologist. And the robot finally gets found because they trick it, and the robot gets so angry about being found that it tries to kill the doctor, and they have to destroy it. And they learn something from it. But this isn't a book, it's a movie. It's a movie that I know there's a lot of people who are going to probably be yelling at their radios for me saying this, but I actually really enjoyed the Transformer movies. I thought they were funny. I thought that the action sequences were enjoyable. I thought that they were a good summer blockbuster movie, but that is all about man versus machines, because the robots are what the conflict are. It's mankind fighting these evil robots with the help of good robots.
Okay, I didn't know we were going to talk about Transformers, and I actually haven't seen any of those movies.
Oh, okay. Well,
I should confess, I don't go to the movies very often.
Yeah, no.
However, a movie that was also a book that is the classic, in my opinion, Man versus Technology is 2001: A Space Odyssey.
There we go.
Where Hal, the computer, goes insane and starts killing people.
Right. And I've read the book, but I haven't seen the movie.
Well, it's by Arthur C. Clarke. And my understanding is that the movie actually came first. It's one of those weird things where the movie came first and then the book happened.
Oh, is it sort of like... Oh, no, I guess Princess Bride, the book came first.
Yeah, I think the book did come first.
I don't know. But the book and the movie are very... In Princess Bride, this is total change of subject, but the book and the movie are both very, very good and very, very funny in completely different ways.
Okay, I have to say that I actually don't think the book Princess Bride is nearly as good as the movie Princess Bride. But if you lift the first half of Princess Bride out and ignore the actual story of Princess Bride, just read the introduction of Princess Bride, it's hysterically funny.
Yes. And the hat sequence in the book, The Princess Bride, is pretty funny.
Okay.
Okay, so that's Man versus Machines wrapped up. Okay, Man versus Self. So we picked Hamlet for a bunch of reasons.
Mostly because it's the classic example.
Right. I really, really, really like Shakespeare. I really, really enjoy Shakespeare. It's one of my favorite things to read, though I don't actually think that you should read it. I think that you should watch it.
Because they're plays.
Because they're plays, and they're meant to be performed. Hamlet is what you think of when you think of Man versus Self. But we actually have a call from Carl, and I'm not sure what he wants to talk about. Hi, Carl. You're on Story Connections with Rebecca, Guthrie, and Kathryn Townsend.
Hi. 2001, A Space Odyssey. I've been a science fiction buff for quite a while. The movie itself was actually based on a short story by Arthur C. Clarke, which was then, after the movie, expanded into a book.
Okay, there you go.
I did not know that.
Thank you
very
so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Bye. Okay, so there you go. It was a short story that got turned into a movie that got turned into a book. And it's a good story any way you look at it.
That's right.
Okay, so back to Man versus Self and Hamlet. So everybody, if I say to be or not to be, can follow with that is the question.
Okay, but can they also say whether 'tis nobler?
Yeah, we're not going to quote the entire monologue because...
That would be tedious.
So for those of you who may not know, Hamlet is the story of the Prince of Denmark who believes that his father has been murdered by his uncle and his mother, so that his mother and his uncle could get married and be gross. And well, it's true.
Okay. That's not how I would have described that, but go on.
There's nothing that I said that's not true. That is gross. To kill your husband so that you can marry his brother, that is gross.
You're right.
And so Hamlet believes that this has happened, and he basically goes insane. And at the end of the play, everybody dies. Hamlet dies. Gertrude dies. Everybody dies. Gertrude is his mother. But it's about his descent into madness. It's about how people go insane. And it's about the conflict that he has with himself as he's descending into madness.
And the to be or not to be is really a should I kill myself or not question.
Right. So when people use it in ads, it really, really bothers me. It also really bothers me. This is sort of a change of subject, but it stays on Shakespeare. There was ads a really long time ago in Tucson for a restaurant. I don't even remember what restaurant it was, but it said "Et tu, Brute," which is the saying "and you, Brutus" from Julius Caesar, which is what Julius Caesar when Brutus betrays him and stabs him. And it had nothing to do with this restaurant, and it really bothered me because it showed a complete lack of understanding about what Julius Caesar is. Anyways, side topic. Just if you're going to use literary references, please use them properly because they mean something. Okay, going to get off my soapbox. What else do we want to say about Hamlet?
Yeah, Hamlet's biggest problem is that he took himself way too seriously.
Yeah, and
and I'm sorry, but Ophelia I do not think is a tragic character.
Well,
She's just tedious.
Right. Well, it's like saying that Romeo and Juliet is, this romantic love story. I'm sorry. It is the 2-week love story between a 14-year-old and a 17-year-old, and they kill each other because they're stupid.
No, because they're teenagers.
Okay. Well, people always seem to forget that Romeo goes to the ball where he meets Juliet because he's pining after some other girl and sees Juliet and goes, oh, never mind, now I want her.
Right. Okay, moving on. Other examples of man versus self would be The Catcher in the Rye.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Faust.
Yes. Well, Faust, but it would also be, I think you could make a reasonable argument that it's man versus God or man versus religion in terms of...
I would be willing to say that you could go both ways there.
Okay, and that's actually a good segment to the next one, which is man versus God or man versus religion. So we'll talk about Faust, even though, because that was a good segment, and then we'll talk about the Odyssey, which is another really good man versus God or religion. So Faust is the story of a man who sells his soul to the devil and the consequences of that.
Right.
In a very brief summary.
Right.
I will have to admit that Faust is a book that I did not finish reading because it scared me so much, because the idea that you could sell your soul to the devil when I tried to read it as an 11-year-old was terrifying, and I never picked the book back up.
I didn't realize that you were trying to read Faust as an 11-year-old. Okay.
Yes. No, I tried to read Faust as an 11-year-old, and it really frightened me. The Wishbone version of this, for those of you who don't know what Wishbone is, Wishbone was a TV show in the mid to late 90s. The Wishbone was a dog, and he became the main character in classic books or plays, and it was teaching children about the joy of literature using Wishbone as the main character. So there would be a thing that happened in modern day, and then there would be the story part that happened, and Wishbone was wonderful and fabulous, and I wish they'd bring it back. And I have a son, and when he's old enough, he's not now, we are going to hunt down copies of Wishbone, and we are going to watch them.
Okay. So, other examples of books with man versus God. The Odyssey.
The Odyssey. So, the gods curse Odysseus to a 20-year voyage to get home after the Trojan War because they made him mad, basically. And it's about how the gods do everything in their power to make sure that he doesn't get home, and on one side, and the gods do everything in their power to make sure that he does get home on the other side. And
well, one of the things that's interesting about the Odyssey is that Odysseus is really a pawn.
Right.
Both directions.
Right. And actually everybody in his family basically ends up being pawns because they just basically hate Odysseus' entire family. But there's lots and lots and lots of versions because the Odyssey is one of the oldest stories that we have. That it was first a oral tale that got written down. So there are lots and lots and lots of translations and versions of the Odyssey, and you should find one that's easy to read because there are some that are very pretentious. And but it's actually a fascinating story, and it's really enjoyable. And I apologize to anybody who had to read it while they were in high school and hated it because they had a bad translation or a bad teacher. So you should go revisit it if you are like, the Odyssey sucks, because it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
And we are almost on a break, so we will talk to you soon.
Intelligent Talk 24/7 on 1030 KVOI, The Voice, on the web at kvoi.com. Intelligent Weekend Talk that's live and local, only on AM 1030 KVOI, The Voice. Call in now, 790-2040. That's 790-2040.
Hi, welcome back to Story Connections. So we are doing the last of the 7 basic plots, and that's man versus the supernatural. And by supernatural, we mean werewolves and vampires.
Okay, so when Rebecca first said she wanted to include man versus the supernatural, I thought that's not really a classic plot. But after thinking about it, there are so many of these books out now that I do think that it's a legitimate category.
So the book that I picked, which if you are a gun nut, you will like. If you are a fantasy sci-fi nut, you will like. If you like vampires and werewolves, and zombies being killed as opposed to being sparkly and having love stories you will like. And the book is called Monster Hunters International, and it's actually that's the first book, but there's a series of them, and it's by Larry Correia. And Monster Hunters International is a book that the premise is that the supernatural exists, and there are people in this world whose jobs it is to find them and hunt them and kill them and get paid for it. So,
and they do that not just sort of gratuitously. They do that because these creatures are dangerous to humanity.
Right. So zombies are evil, vampires are evil, werewolves are evil. So the way that the book starts is that Owen Z. Pitt is the protagonist and the hero, and his boss turns into a werewolf late one night, and he successfully kills his boss barehanded and gets a job offer from Monster Hunters International, and it's the story about how he becomes a monster hunter, and it's fabulous. It's funny, it's interesting. Larry Correia used to be a professional shooter, so he used to do shooting competitions, so his technical details for his guns and how they work make it so that I, who totally believe in the Second Amendment but don't particularly care for guns, could completely understand what was happening.
Yeah, if you are a pacifist or you don't like violent stories, you will not like these books.
Right. Twilight is man versus supernatural.
Okay, you don't have to sound quite so disgusted.
Okay. I know that there are a lot of people that like Twilight, and I read every single one of the Twilight books, and I totally understand why they are as popular as they are, but I did not care for them. And we'll talk about books on the show. We will talk about books on the show that we don't care about, that people may be passionate about. So, if you're passionate about a book and you want to call us and tell us why we don't understand how wonderful this book is, we would love to have that conversation with you, because that's what makes the world go round. So that is the 7 basic plot structures. That's what we are going to be talking about in this radio show. Everything sums up into one of those. So they're man versus nature, man versus society, man versus machine/technology, man versus self, man versus God, and man versus the supernatural. And now it is time for our recommended book of the week. Every week each of us will recommend a book that we think that you should pick up and read. And we would like to thank our sponsors for the recommended book of the week, David Guthrie with Coldwell Banker and Susanna Townsend with Susanna Lynn Photography. And you can find their contact info on our website, which is www.whystoriesmatter.com. Again, that's whystoriesmatter.com. Or you can find the website link on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/whystoriesmatter. So, Kathryn, what is your recommended book of the week?
Oh, I thought you were going to go first.
Oh, okay. I will go first because my book's sitting right here. So my recommended book of the week is a book called Savvy. It was a 2009 Newbery honorary book, and it is the story of Mibbs Beaumont, who lives in a family that is unusual in that on their 13th birthday, everybody gets what's called a savvy. And so, for example, her mother's savvy is that she's practically perfect, like Mary Poppins. She even makes mistakes perfectly. One of her older brothers is that he can control electricity. Another one of her brothers can make storms. So the beginning of the book, you're leading up to Mibbs' 13th birthday. It's 2 days before her 13th birthday. And the day before her 13th birthday, her husband, she's 13, that would make no sense, her father is in a catastrophic car accident on his way home. And so instead of her birthday being this big, exciting deal, it's this very stressful time. And she wakes up on her 13th birthday, and she thinks she knows what her savvy is. And she thinks that her savvy can help her father recover. So she and her older brother and one of her older brothers and her younger brother and two friends run away to try to get to the hospital, which is 90 miles away. And it's the adventure of them getting there. And I read it 2 days ago. It is a YA, a young adult novel, so I was able to read this. It's 200 pages. I was able to read it in about an hour and a half because it was a very fast read. But it was very heartfelt. It was very heartwarming, and you totally related to Mibbs. You totally believed her as a 13-year-old. You believed that Ingrid Law, who wrote the book, was talking in a 13-year-old voice, and I really, really enjoyed it. So that's my book of the week, Savvy by Ingrid Law, and you can get that's going to be posted on our website so that you can, if you're interested, you can go find a link and buy it. So, Kathryn.
Okay, so the book that I chose is Astoria, and the subtitle for the book Astoria is John Jacob Astor and Thomas Jefferson's Lost Pacific Empire, a story of wealth, ambition, and survival. So, and it's by Peter Stark. So I had, of course, heard of Lewis and Clark because, I went to school in America, so of course I'd heard of Lewis and Clark.
Really?
What I didn't know was that there had been a follow-up visit. Follow-up trip, where they were trying to create an outpost in Oregon to take advantage of the things that Lewis and Clark had discovered. And this book is about that endeavor. And Astor actually funded 2 expeditions to set up a fur trading outpost. And while he was probably a pretty smart guy, the people that he chose to lead his expeditions were not really fantastic human beings. And so in terms of plots, we've got man against nature and man against man going on. It is a nonfiction story, obviously. And, I read a lot of narrative nonfiction, which is nonfiction that tells stories. So this particular book, I was angry, I was frightened, I was excited, I was anticipating. And I think that if you're interested in history or you like adventure stories, it's the kind of story that you would probably enjoy. It's by Peter Stark. I had never read anything by him before, and I actually enjoyed it enough that I'm going to start looking for other books that he's written.
Oh, well, very cool. So, again, my book was Savvy by Ingrid Law, and Kathryn's book was Astoria by Peter Stark. And there will be links for both of those books on our website, which, again, is whystoriesmatter.com or facebook.com/whystoriesmatter. So, yeah, you should join us there. Or the website is a WordPress blog website, so we have comments, and we'd love to hear what you guys are thinking and what you guys would be interested in having us talk about, or book recommendations that you have, because I firmly believe that book readers should band together and we should talk about the books that we read, and we want to create that kind of a community to talk about that. So for next week, we will be talking about YA Lit, why it's not just for young adults anymore.
Because YA Lit is young adult literature.
I am a huge YA Lit reader. It's one of my when I need a new book and I want to read something, that's typically where I go. I think that most YA Lit is much better written than a lot of adult literature.
I actually think you're right about that. I think part of that is because kids don't tolerate garbage in the same way that adults will tolerate garbage.
So we will be talking about those books, and we'd love to hear from you this week about on our Facebook page or on the WordPress blog about what it is that you are reading. So that's our show. This is what Story Connections is. It will be Kathryn and me talking about books and what we think about them and why we think about them, and we hope that you have enjoyed it and that you will join us again next week at 4 because it's going to be fun.
It is going to be fun.
Okay, so I'm Rebecca Guthrie, and
I'm Kathryn Townsend.
And we will see you next week on Story Connections at 4 on KVOI 1030 The Voice. Thanks.
Bye.